Real Madrid built the most terrifying attacking trio in modern football history. We all expected fireworks. But right now, the most dangerous collisions aren't happening against opposition defenders. They are happening behind the closed doors of Valdebebas. And nobody is talking about what Kylian Mbappe's latest clash actually means for the survival of this club. I have watched this club for years now. And this whole situation in the dressing room, man, it's been eating at me. We are looking at a team that just won absolutely everything. A squad that brought in arguably the best player in the world to cement their dynasty. And yet, watching them right now feels like watching a time bomb ticking down to zero. The tension is palpable. You can feel it bleeding right through the television screen. If you turn on any major sports network today, the media is talking about formations. They are drawing arrows on touchscreens, analyzing Alvaro Arbeloa's tactical suggestions from the coaching staff, debating the missing presence of Toni Kroos, or pointing out how Carlo Ancelotti's system isn't clicking. They are dissecting heat maps and XG data trying to find the missing link. But the media is looking at the wrong thing. The real story is a toxic hierarchy collapse. That is not a tactical slump. That is an institutional meltdown. Let's look at the facts that are leaking out of the Spanish press. Recently, Federico Valverde, the engine of this team, the player who literally bleeds white, was hospitalized. According to reports from The Athletic and ESPN, Valverde suffered a brain injury and required 10 to 14 days of rest. The cause? It wasn't a reckless tackle from an Alaves defender in a high-stakes La Liga match. It was a physical altercation with his own teammate, Aurelien Tchouaméni, which started on the training pitch and continued violently into the dressing room. Now, think about that for a second, and then add this piece of the puzzle. Antonio Rudiger, the veteran enforcer, slapped young Alvaro Carreras in a moment of pure, uncontrolled frustration after a tense match. Rudiger had to host a dinner for the players and their families just to apologize and de-escalate the tension. The club's PR machine, along with Carreras himself, immediately tried to spin it as an isolated incident. The less generous, and far more accurate reading, is that these are the physical symptoms of a suffocating environment. Carlo Ancelotti has built his entire legacy on one specific, unteachable skill: management. He is the father figure, the pacifier of egos. He survived the first Galacticos era, he survived the volatile dressing rooms of Chelsea and Bayern Munich, and he guided this current Madrid generation to Champions League glory through sheer emotional intelligence. But right now, Ancelotti is completely silent. He is standing on the touchline with his signature raised eyebrow, but the control he once exerted over this squad is slipping through his fingers. When your midfield general ends up in the hospital because of a fight with his own partner, the manager has lost the room. We have to understand why this is happening. You don't just wake up one morning at the most prestigious club in the world and decide to hospitalize your teammate. This level of physical violence among the squad's hardest workers is a symptom. It is the trickle-down effect of a fractured hierarchy at the very top of the food chain. Think back to just a few months ago. Jude Bellingham was the undisputed king of Madrid. He was the sun, and the rest of the team comfortably orbited around him. There was a clear center of gravity. Then, Kylian Mbappé arrived. You cannot simply drag a new, massive star into an existing solar system and expect the planets to keep their alignment. When Mbappé walked through those doors, he didn't just bring his goals. He brought an expectation of absolute supremacy. He expects to be the sun. But Bellingham has not vacated the throne. While Valverde and Tchouaméni are physically clashing, Mbappé has been engaged in direct verbal confrontations with Jude Bellingham and the coaching staff. This is why the tactical whiteboard is useless. The system is broken because the trust is gone. Let's look at the epicenter of this earthquake. The Spanish press has quietly confirmed what the body language on the pitch has been screaming for weeks. Kylian Mbappé has engaged in direct, heated verbal exchanges with Jude Bellingham, as well as members of Carlo Ancelotti's coaching staff. We are seeing frustrated gestures during matches, arms thrown up in exasperation when a pass isn't played exactly to his feet, and intense, unsmiling conversations during tactical drills at Valdebebas. Now, the generous reading is that this is simply the passion of a generational talent demanding the highest standards from his new peers. The less generous, and far more accurate reading, is entirely different. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a power grab. To understand this, we have to look at the psychology of the modern superstar, a dynamic that is fascinating, Whether you are a young fan tracking daily social media narratives, or a middle-aged observer who has seen these ego clashes play out across different eras of football, Mbappe did not arrive in Madrid as a promising prospect willing to earn his stripes. He arrived as a king. For the better part of a decade at Paris Saint-Germain, he was the undisputed nucleus of the project. The club's transfer policy, the managerial appointments, the tactical formations, everything was bent to accommodate his preferences. He operated in an environment where his supremacy was essentially legislated by his contract. But when he walked into the Real Madrid dressing room, he stepped into a space that had just conquered Europe without him. More importantly, he stepped into a space occupied by Jude Bellingham. Last season, Bellingham was not just a midfielder. He was the savior. He was the player scoring the 90th minute winners, absorbing the immense pressure of the Bernabéu, and dictating the emotional temperature of the squad. Bellingham was the sun. The rest of the team, from the veteran defenders to the young wingers, comfortably orbited around his immense presence. Basic physics tells us that a stable system cannot have two suns. If you introduce a second massive gravitational force into an established orbit, the planets do not simply adjust. They are violently pulled off their axes. This is the center of gravity problem that Carlo Ancelotti is currently failing to solve. Mbappe expects the team's tactical and emotional gravity to pull toward him. He expects the system to cater to his runs, and he implicitly expects Bellingham to step back, drop deeper, and become the facilitator for his historic legacy. But Bellingham, having just tasted the ultimate authority and adoration of the Madrid faithful, is understandably refusing to voluntarily vacate the throne. This is why you see the tactical heat maps looking so chaotic, with Mbappe, Bellingham, and Vinícius Jr constantly stepping on each other's toes in the final third. It is not because Ancelotti suddenly forgot how to organize a forward line. It is because the players themselves are subconsciously resisting the structure to assert their own dominance. The coaching staff is caught in the middle of a cold war. When Mbappe clashes with the coaches, he is testing the boundaries of his new kingdom. He is forcing a fundamental question onto the board. Who does this club protect first? The collective harmony that won the Champions League? Or the ultimate Galactico they spent 7 years trying to sign? When the most influential figures in a dressing room are locked in a battle for the alpha position, the tension does not stay contained at the top. The friction generates a toxic atmosphere. It drips down into every passing drill, every team meeting, and every rondo. The resulting suffocation is what creates an environment where players lower down the hierarchy are forced to absorb the pressure, until eventually, something has to break. But to truly understand the depth of this crisis, we have to connect the whispers at the top to the blood at the bottom. We have to look at the secret revelation that the tactical analysts are completely missing. Everyone in the media is treating the verbal sparring between Mbappe and Bellingham as an isolated ego clash, and the physical violence involving Valverde, Tchouaméni, and Rudiger as a separate issue of overzealous training. They are not separate. They are the exact same problem. Let's look at the reality of the pitch. When you have 2 or 3 superstars operating with the mindset of a primary focal point, defensive responsibilities vanish. Mbappe, accustomed to the Parisian luxury of walking when the opposition has the ball, is largely bypassing the defensive press. Bellingham, desperate to maintain his offensive output from last season and reclaim his central spotlight, is pushing higher and higher up the pitch. Add Vinícius Jr to this equation, and you have 3 isolated islands of attacking intent demanding the ball. So, who is left to cover the massive, gaping voids in the midfield? Federico Valverde and Aurelien Tchouaméni. Game after game, these two are being asked to do the running of 4 men. They are covering the wings, protecting the center backs, and trying to transition the ball forward, all while watching the attacking trio stand with their hands on their hips, complaining about the quality of the service. The generous reading is that training at Valdebebas is just intense, a natural byproduct of an elite, high-stakes winning mentality. The less generous, and far more accurate reading, is trickle-down frustration. When the elite tier of a hierarchy engages in a cold war of egos, they don't suffer the physical consequences. The working class does. The sheer physical exhaustion and tactical suffocation placed upon Valverde and Tchouaméni inevitably bred a deep, dark resentment. You do not hospitalize your midfield partner, fracturing his skull over a misplaced pass in a Tuesday morning rondo. You hospitalize him because the pressure cooker has no release valve. The tension at the top compressed the midfield, until it literally exploded into violence. That is not a training ground accident. That is the sound of an engine breaking apart from the inside. This psychological dynamic perfectly explains the Antonio Rudiger incident as well. Why is a seasoned, Champions League winning veteran slapping a young peripheral player, like Alvaro Carreras, after a match? In psychology, this is called displacement. Rudiger is the emotional enforcer of this squad. He sees the systemic collapse occurring in real time. He feels the dressing room fracturing into cliques, but he cannot walk up and slap Kylian Mbappé. He cannot physically assault the €100 million golden boy from England. He cannot scream at Florentino Perez for breaking a winning formula to sell more shirts. The frustration has to go somewhere. So, it gets violently displaced onto the most vulnerable target in the vicinity. That is not leadership. That is a hierarchy turning on itself. And where is Carlo Ancelotti in all of this? The undisputed master of dressing room diplomacy has been reduced to a spectator. His silence during press conferences is not a calculated managerial tactic. It is paralysis. Ancelotti knows that if he publicly disciplines Mbappe, he immediately angers the president who just spent 7 years chasing this specific signing. If he benches Bellingham to restore tactical balance, he alienates the dressing room's established emotional core and the fans' beloved hero. He is completely trapped. He is standing on the touchline, watching the working-class engine room of his team literally beat each other bloody, while the untouchable kings argue over who gets to wear the crown. History tells us exactly how this ends. We do not need to guess. We just need to look at the immediate past, specifically the past that Kylian Mbappé himself just walked away from. Think about Paris Saint-Germain during the M&M era: Lionel Messi, Neymar, and Mbappé. On paper, it was the most devastating attacking trident ever assembled in the history of the sport. It was a video game cheat code brought to life. But in reality, the dressing room became a fractured kingdom of special privileges. Their Champions League campaigns repeatedly ended in humiliation, not because they lacked world-class talent, but because when you have 3 players who feel exempt from the collective struggle of defending, the structural integrity of the team collapses against truly elite opposition. If you want to see the absolute worst-case scenario of a dressing room hierarchy completely imploding under the weight of unchecked egos, look no further than the French national team at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. The infamous mutiny of Kennisna, when Nicolas Anelka clashed with manager Raymond Dominic, and the players literally went on strike, refusing to step off the team bus. It wasn't just a tactical disagreement. It was a collective suicide. They had a squad packed with Champions League winners, but the authority of the manager had been entirely eroded. The players believed they were bigger than the system, bigger than the manager, and ultimately, bigger than the shirt they were wearing. Now, there is a completely valid version of this story where these current tensions are just growing pains. There is a scenario where Carlo Ancelotti, with all his infinite wisdom and patience, calls a closed-door meeting, smooths over the bruised egos, and finds a temporary tactical compromise. Real Madrid could easily go out next weekend, string together a massive win. Mbappe could score a spectacular hat-trick from a Bellingham assist, and the media will immediately declare the crisis over. The narrative will flip overnight, and they will say the Galactico chemistry is finally clicking. But football is not a simulation. It is a fragile, breathing ecosystem built entirely on human relationships, trust, and mutual sacrifice. You cannot just drag and drop a collection of 9-9 rated superstars onto a pitch and expect them to conquer Europe simply because of their individual transfer values. Winning at the absolute highest level requires suffering. It requires the willingness to run your body into the ground, to cover a teammate's mistake, to willingly step out of the spotlight so someone else can shine. The problem at Real Madrid right now is not a lack of talent, and it is certainly not a lack of ambition. It is a lack of sacrifice. When the kings at the top of the food chain refuse to suffer for the collective, the working class below them is crushed by the weight of having to do it all themselves. And historically, an empire where only the foot soldiers bleed is an empire that is preparing to fall. This ticking time bomb at Valdebebas cannot diffuse itself. The laws of football physics simply won't allow it. Florentino Perez is not going to sell Kylian Mbappe after spending 7 years constructing the ultimate financial package to bring him to the Spanish capital. Jude Bellingham, with the entire English media machine behind him and a Champions League medal already in his pocket, is not going to quietly accept a secondary, subservient role. And players like Federico Valverde cannot physically survive another season doing the running of an entire midfield while the Kings argue above them. Something has to give. And history shows us that when a billion-dollar dressing room fractures into warring factions, the president doesn't fire the players. He fires the peacemaker. If Carlo Ancelotti cannot find a way to suppress one of these massive egos and restore the center of gravity, he will inevitably become the scapegoat for Florentino Perez's broken Galactico experiment. I look at this situation, and honestly, man, it's been eating at me. We are watching the potential self-destruction of one of the greatest squads ever assembled, and it has absolutely nothing to do with tactics, formations, or talent. It is pure, unfiltered human ego. But I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Is Kylian Mbappé actively destroying the collective, winning culture that Jude Bellingham and Ancelotti built last season? Or are we just overreacting to the growing pains of a squad that just needs time to adjust to their new king? Come back to this video when January rolls around, or the next time Madrid faces a truly elite opponent in the Champions League knockout stages, because the tension in that dressing room is going to force someone out. The cracks are already showing in the training ground hospital bills, and pretty soon, the whole world is going to see them on the pitch. If this kind of behind-the-scenes analysis looking at the real psychology, the dressing room politics, and the power dynamics of the sport is what you come here for, hit subscribe. Turn on the notifications. Because when the next domino falls in Madrid, we'll be here to break it down. I'll see you in the next one.